Dr. Foster.
Yeah, there's a lot of smart agriculture that's heading into that direction. We've had a lot of projects for like
Thank you. Thanks for being here.
asparagus, because it has a very fine temperature growing.
Don't mind, you can sit down.
We're just waiting for
Very
Dr. Foster.
fine temperature growing.
Can we wait for Dr. Foster?
So we've got sensors that the farmers know.
Rajkumar.
I'm covered over.
Nancy, where are you going to be?
Yeah, there really is.
We'll survive. Hi, Mark. How you doing? Happy belated birthday. Nice to see you. This hearing will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recess at any time. Good morning. Welcome. It's truly significant to be here today in Livonia, Michigan. I am delighted to host today's hearing and extend my warmest welcome and thank you to my esteemed colleagues, Congressman Bill Foster of Illinois and Congressman Michael Cloud of Texas. We thank our chairwoman, Eddie Bernice Johnson, and ranking member Jim Baird, who could not be with us here today for the hearing, but are supportive partners of today's event. We also recognize our recently departed colleague, Congressman Elijah Cummings of Maryland. Mr. Cummings was a known and calming presence in the halls of Congress, reflecting on his legacy and his wishes for our Congress. Mr. Cummings would be doing exactly what we are doing here today, figuring out ways to advance our country and to help his district. He had a significant emphasis in our Congress, incredible talents, and a voice that spoke truth. As his body lay in state yesterday in the Capitol, my colleagues and I said goodbye to a man who worked up until his last living moments on this earth. May we all be so lucky to witness such service to others and love of the beautiful country we call home. We are here today to examine the use of smart technology to improve the abilities of small cities and suburban communities to provide safe and efficient mobility solutions. Smart mobility. It's a community issue. Michigan's 11th district has been on the forefront of these innovations, playing a key role with our industry leaders and best-in-class workforce. So it is only fitting that we gather here today to discuss how to make technology more effective through collaboration between public, private, and academic stakeholders. These are some of the questions that compel the work of Congress. How to best use government to yield the best results for regional economies like ours. Recent developments in connected and autonomous vehicles combined with increasing computing power and travel data have enabled rapid advances in regional planning and mobility. Smart mobility technologies have already begun to shape how Americans move around and live. They are being used to reduce traffic congestion and cut emissions. A 2019 study by Texas A&M University found that national gridlock costs our country $160 million per year and support for several to meet the scale of the challenge and opportunity. Smart mobility technologies also have the potential to move us towards the goal of a society with zero traffic fatalities. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration announced just this week that overall highway fatalities decreased by 2.4% in 2018, the second year of declines. However, nearly 40,000 people lost their lives on our roadways. The same report showed that pedestrian fatalities increased 3.4% and bicycle fatalities increased 6.3%. Finally, these technologies have the potential to provide affordable and reliable transportation to basic services like healthcare and employment for those living with disabilities, older adults, and others who do not have access access to individual transportation. We need to start having a broader conversation about how smart technology can be applied in all communities. What works within major city limits may not work in the suburbs or small towns in which mobility options are more limited. The solution involves working with our communities, including our city councils, township boards, and county commissions across America with their unique needs in mind. Research is essential to achieving this goal. In addition to supporting near-term deployment and testing of new technologies, it is important to invest in long-term research that looks beyond the horizon of today's capabilities. When America becomes a leader in the equitable development of mobility solutions, we will yet again set the standards and norms the rest of the world will follow. So welcome to this insightful dialogue on the transformations and capabilities of the 21st century mobility technologies in the home of American transportation. Before I recognize Mr. Cloud for his opening statement, I would like to present for the record a robust set of letters of support from Pratt Miller, Ford Motor Company, BASF, Toyota Gosai, Rolls-Royce, Harman International, General Motors, ZF North America, and ITS. Thank you all so much. And now the chair recognizes Mr. Cloud for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairwoman Stevens. I appreciate the invitation to be with you here today in Michigan's 11th District. I am excited to be here and look forward to the conversation today. Thank you, witnesses, for being here. And thank you all for caring about this issue and showing up. I'm looking forward to a very healthy conversation on an issue that's really important as we look forward. All of us on this committee are aware of the challenges our nation is facing with our aging infrastructure. But as we look to address these issues, it's important that we take time to look ahead and dream about the future that can be, to ensure that our public policy skates to where the puck is going, so to speak. Fundamental research can drive innovation that yields better and safer commutes for our constituents. These technologies, like enhanced safety features in vehicles, smart infrastructure, and wireless communication between vehicles and infrastructure, have the potential to benefit folks from rural South Texas or the suburbs of Detroit. Smart mobility has the potential to increase safety and reduce congestion. And as we work, we must ensure that smart mobility technologies also advance a better life, quality of life for all communities. Citizens in urban, suburban, and rural communities rely on our transportation infrastructure to go to work, to attend school, to keep medical appointments, run errands, and travel to recreational activities. According to the Texas A&M Transportation Institute, the rural transit system in Texas faces increasing demand from a growing population of older and disabled residents. These men and women are impeded by long travel distances to medical care and social services. Texas Department of Transportation data shows that rural transit districts saw an increase of ridership from 2016 to 2017, providing about 4.5 million trips statewide. Individually, communities, especially rural ones, have a limited capacity and capability to develop and to deploy mobility advanced solutions. In Texas, to assist in addressing this challenge, the Texas Department of Transportation has created the Texas Innovation Alliance. This alliance is a network of local, regional, and state agencies and research institutions that develop a portfolio of advanced mobility projects across the state of Texas, where I'm from. This alliance provides a platform for cities and regions to leverage resources and expertise to address some of the state's most pressing mobility challenges. Like the Alliance, I today too look forward to hearing from our witnesses about the research, development, and technology activities being conducted by research institutions and the private sector and applied at state and local governments. And as a representative of a diverse district with both large, small cities and many rural communities, I also hope to hear from our witnesses about how your work can benefit both the metropolitan and rural areas, and specifically how we can best assist these communities for planning and preparing for the future. I want to thank you all for being here today again, and thank you all for being here. We look forward to just an awesome conversation. I yield back.
Thank you. Well, if there are members who wish to submit additional opening statements, your statements will be added to the record at this point. And at this time, I'd also like to introduce and recognize our incredible collection of witnesses who have joined us here today. Our first witness is the Honorable David Coulter. Mr. Coulter currently serves as Oakland County's 3rd county executive. He previously represented southeastern Oakland County on the Board of Commissioners from 2002 to 2010. During the time on the board, he was a member of the Finance Committee, which oversaw Oakland County's balanced 3-year budget, and he also recently served as the mayor of Ferndale. Mr. Coulter earned a bachelor's degree from Michigan State University and an executive education certificate from the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. Our next witness is Mr. Mark Dowd. Mr. Dowd is the founder and executive director of Smart Cities Lab, a nonprofit that provides a venue for cities to share what works and partner with the innovation community to forge new solutions. He is also a visiting scholar at the University of California, Berkeley. He previously served in several roles in the Obama administration, including senior advisor in the White House Office of Management and Budget, senior advisor in the White House Council of Environmental Quality, and a member of President Obama's Hurricane Sandy Task Force as a senior member, and also, let us not forget, as a senior member of the President's Auto Task Force. Mr. Dowd holds degrees from Rutgers College and Seton Hall University School of Law. After Mr. Dowd is Dr. Rajkumar. Dr. Rajkumar is the director of the Metro 21 Smart Cities Institute, the TSET National US DOT University Transportation Center for Safety, and Mobility 21, a US DOT National University Transportation Center for Mobility. He is also the George Westinghouse Professor at Carnegie Mellon University's Department of Electrical and Computing Engineering. Dr. Rajkumar's work is primarily in cyber-physical systems such as autonomous driving and vehicle networks. His research interests include operating systems, wireless networking protocols, model-based design tools, and power management. Dr. Rajkumar received his PhD from Carnegie Mellon University. The next witness, our next witness, is Dr. Tierra Bills. Dr. Bills is an assistant professor in the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department at Wayne State University. Much of her research focuses on investigating the social impacts of transportation projects. She develops activity-based travel demand models to investigate individual and household level transportation equity effects for the purpose of designing transportation systems that will provide more equitable returns to society. Dr. Bills holds a bachelor's degree in civil engineering technology from Florida A&M University and a master's and PhD in civil and environmental engineering from the University of California, Berkeley, although she is a hometown gal. Our final witness is Mr. Scott Averitt. Mr. Averitt works in the Corporate Government Affairs Group for Bosch, located here in southeastern Michigan, where he serves as a technical expert and manager focused on advanced R&D projects, public-private partnerships, and government-funded projects. He collaborates across all 4 of Bosch's business sectors, including mobility solutions, industrial technology, consumer goods, and energy and building technology. Mr. Averitt holds a degree in electrical engineering from Lawrence Technical University right here in Southfield. As our witnesses should know, you will each have 5 minutes for your spoken testimony. Your written testimony will be included in the record for this hearing. When you have completed your spoken testimony, we will begin with questions, and each member will have 5 minutes to question the panel. And it should also be recognized that we have a robust audience in attendance here today, representing the stakeholders in southeastern Michigan who are relying on these mobility solutions, working on these mobility solutions, and proliferating new technologies so that regions like ours will lead the world. We will start with Mr. Coulter for a 5-minute testimony. Mr. Coulter.
Thank you, and good morning to everyone, and especially the esteemed members of the Subcommittee on Research and Technology. I'm honored to be here and grateful to Congresswoman Stevens and her colleagues for the invitation to testify on smart mobility. As the Congresswoman said, I'm Dave Coulter. I'm the County Executive for Oakland County, Michigan, which is the home of Fiat Chrysler Headquarters and Engineering Center, General Motors Proving Ground, Nissan Research and Development Center, and hundreds of suppliers and other companies working on the development of smart mobility technologies. Oakland County is also home to 1.25 million residents and 1.14 million registered vehicles. That's about 912 cars for every 1,000 residents, which far exceeds the national average. We like our cars. The Road Commission for Oakland County, which is a separate entity from the county, maintains the largest county road system in Michigan. Now, in 1967, Oakland County had 6.8 deaths for every 100 million vehicle miles of travel. 50 years later, in 2017, that number was reduced to 0.53 deaths per 100 million vehicle miles traveled. It's a huge improvement over 5 decades, but we still have a way to go to prevent fatal and injury traffic crashes. The goal is to reduce, if not outright eliminate, traffic fatalities. Oakland County believes the solution lies in public-private partnerships that will enable cars to utilize smart mobility technology to talk to each other and the road infrastructure around them. Today, I'd like to give you just a brief snapshot of how Oakland County is partnering with other governments, nonprofits, and private industry to advance smart mobility development. Our biggest project to date involves P3 Mobility, a Toronto, Ontario-based company, which was selected by Oakland County to develop a business plan for a connected vehicle infrastructure using smart mobility technology. The contract between Oakland County and P3 Mobility was signed on January 23rd of this year. Our partnership with them is launching a pilot to use roadside units placed at intersections to test both smart mobility technology and multiple revenue-generating opportunities. Advanced safety technologies provide consumers with improved vehicle innovations that save lives. We believe these new technologies can eliminate 94% of fatal crashes involving human error. If a successful business model can be developed, this will guide Oakland County in generating revenue to offset the cost of the deployment of connected vehicle infrastructure to Oakland County's 1,600 signalized intersections and create a safer road system. This pilot program has explored funding options with traditional infrastructure financing entities, but has experienced resistance. We believe that resistance will continue until a state or federal vehicle safety mandate is established and/or the industry further advances smart mobility technology to make it more cost-effective. There are other smart mobility projects occurring around Oakland County. The Michigan Department of Transportation is utilizing its modernization of I-75 in Oakland County from 8 Mile to M59 to install smart mobility technology infrastructure so cars can receive information about road conditions on the freeway, on weather and road conditions, backups, curve warnings ahead, and that sort of thing. It's worth noting that the auto companies will use this stretch of I-75 as a test bed for smart mobility technology. Another MDOT smart mobility project that runs through Oakland County worthy of mention is roadside units, which will be placed up along Woodward Avenue from downtown Detroit to Pontiac. These roadside units will make drivers aware of real-time traffic information, will perform green light prioritization to move traffic through an intersection, and offer a safety message network which will alert drivers to traffic threats such as vehicles approaching an intersection at a high rate of speed. Related smart mobility infrastructure projects by MDOT are also either underway or will be in the near future on major roads in Oakland County, like Telegraph, M59, I-696, I-96, among others. So as you can see, smart mobility is of immeasurable value to Oakland County and its businesses and residents because it will improve traffic safety and quality of life and attract jobs by driving business development. Oakland County is proud to be on the leading edge of this development of smart technology and we'll continue to work with our public, private, and nonprofit partners to move smart mobility solutions forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Coulter. Mr. Dowd, you now have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairwoman Stevens, Congressman Cloud, and Congressman Foster. My testimony will focus on how small towns and suburban communities can begin the journey of providing safe and efficient smart mobility solutions. A little bit about the lab, Smart Cities Lab. Grew out of the work I did in the prior administration. We set up the lab as a city-facing organization focusing on helping communities, cities, and regions to decipher and engage in innovative mobility solutions. The lab is comprised of 12 cities that have a wide range of population, from under 100,000 people to over 4 million, different growth patterns from dense to suburban, and a diverse political compositions. My mission is to find ways for cities and communities to collaborate with each other and to share what works and, more importantly, what doesn't work in the area of smart mobility and equity. It is true that smaller communities and cities often lack the expertise and capacity to engage in this space, but I believe it is only through collaboration with similarly situated communities that you'll be able to find the ability to engage in smart mobility. I wanted to provide some of the best practices that we found over the past 4 years in working with communities, and I think there are 9 of them. I'll move through them quickly. First is resist the pull of the shiny technology-driven solution. It's often very hard for communities not to go for the thing that looks good instead of going for the thing that they need. Second, and probably most important best practice, is understanding and defining your community's needs and challenges. That's the first thing you do. It is often to rush towards the solution rather than focus on what it is, the problem, and then use the technology and innovation to just try to solve that problem. Collaborate and partner with other local and regional universities. The ability to work with universities expands the capacity of local communities to be able to do and see much more of the opportunity that's out there. Conduct deep community engagement. Understanding what your community needs rather than guessing what your community needs is a critical tool in being able to deploy smart mobility. Developing regional and statewide communities of practice. I think that this is an important piece, and I want to spend 2 seconds on this because Congressman Cloud mentioned the Texas Innovation Alliance. The lab works directly with the Texas Innovation Alliance we've developed 4 communities of practice. Those 4 communities of practice, we drive the capacity piece I was talking about, that many of the communities in Texas and many of the cities and communities that I work with don't have the ability to do the things that they need to do. They don't have the data scientists. They don't have experts like Raj. They don't have them at their fingertip. But cities like Pittsburgh work directly with CMU to work to try to get that done, and then share that knowledge with the other cities and the communities of practice. Those communities of practice focus on 4 areas. The 4 areas that we focus on are seamless mobility, the ability to move seamlessly from one place to the other without having to get necessarily in your car. The second piece is real-time data. It's often very difficult for communities to both develop and then also ingest all that data, so they work on that piece. Equity and access. It is often very difficult for people who are transit dependent to be able to get to the places where they need to get to, and being able to get people to work. And so we work on equity and access in that space. And last is energy and sustainability, and trying to deal with the fact that transportation is the largest emitter of greenhouse gases in our country. The 6th best practice is breaking down the silo barriers that I'm sure that even the county executive would agree that even within your community, there are many people who work in a vertical way rather than a cross-functional way. And once you start working cross-functionally, you can actually start breaking down some of those barriers. Not all private sector companies make good partners. That's a very important piece to understand. Some obviously Bosch, I believe, is one of those companies that is a good partner. I know that our experience in the lab, that General Motors has been an excellent partner. And then there are other companies who are not very good partners. And it's very important for communities to understand the difference between those two things. And again, to the extent that the company is out there co-creating a solution with you as opposed to selling you something, that's the better road to go. Preparing your workforce for an automated future. That's a really important piece that it's hard to do. And the capacity within Southeast Michigan to be able to prepare your community for this with the companies that you have here, I would rely on their expertise and their ability to be able to help you make that transition. Last one is making transportation affordable. It is really, really hard right now for communities that are car dependent, for the people who don't have cars, for the people who don't necessarily have access to those, and they have to take an Uber or Lyft. It's $15, $20. It took me, cost me $27 to get here. So affordable transportation in rural communities and in suburban situations is really important. Thank you very much. I appreciate the time.
Dr. Rajkumar, you have 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairwoman Stevens, Congressman Foster, and Congressman Cloud. Thank you for this opportunity for me to testify before this important hearing today. I am Rajkumar from Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I want to thank this committee for its interest in smart cities technology. My academic career and success as an entrepreneur for AV technologies have benefited directly from funding from the federal agencies whose missions have been shaped by this committee. These agencies and you have helped make possible a revolution in innovation that has helped to sustain U.S. economic leadership. I would like to acknowledge in particular Mark Dowd's leadership during the previous administration in this regard. My testimony today will highlight 3 key strategic elements that are vital to realizing a revolution in smart cities and mobility. 1, continued U.S. commitment to advancing the basic sciences that underpin smart city, smart region innovation. 2, a focus on integrating research and innovation with deployment at the regional level. And 3, an emphasis on smart city strategy to create a supportive policy environment that blends workforce and rural development initiatives with innovation. Smart city applications depend upon the integration of technologies that span the domain of cyber-physical systems, fundamental research in cyber-physical systems, networking, AI and machine learning, robotics, human-machine teaming, cybersecurity, and privacy at NSF, DOT, DOE, DOT, NASA, and NIST will continue to be vital to advancing these capabilities. This continued support of basic research should also be aligned with cross-disciplinary collaboration. Smart city innovations involve the science of systems integration. A smart city research initiative would include development of a roadmap for filling gaps in the science of systems integration and interagency coordination. My second key point is that fundamental research in enabling technologies needs to be effectively coupled with application initiatives. At CMU, we refer to this model as research, development, and deployment, or D&D. We engage with local governments to identify research targets, develop projects, and pilot solutions that can be scaled once proven successful. For example, an initiative to deploy AI-enabled traffic signals to improve traffic flow and lower emissions started with 9 intersections and is now being deployed in cities across the nation. A follow-on project enables persons with disabilities to use smartphones to communicate with traffic signals. The system can recognize their presence and accommodate their slow movements through the intersection, giving them confidence that they will have the time to cross safely. The RD&D model also accelerates the technology transfer process. Carnegie Mellon has started several startup companies emerging from our projects, which are disseminating innovations to cities across the nation and beyond. The RD&D model also lends itself to creating networks of communities to share the best practices. The Metro Lab Network, established as a 501c3 organization by CMU, links together a virtual community of government-university partnerships across the U.S., engaging more than 40 cities, 60 universities, and over 100 projects. Another model of collaboration proposed by Carnegie Mellon is the Smart Belt Coalition, an effort across Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania to establish a dynamic and proactive collaboration that brings together universities, transportation authorities, and industry to foster dialogue and undertake specific projects that focus on informing the regulatory environment for connected and automated vehicles. Therefore, new funding to support smart city initiatives should combine basic research with support for deployment initiatives such as grant challenges in specific funding areas. My third key point is that smart city research initiatives should also focus on the effective policy building blocks to ensure broad adoption. One essential area is the critical need to build the workforce to support smart city development. This must include both a focus on specific technical degrees and focus on fostering community capacity building. Federal research programs that incorporate education components can have a catalytic impact on building the technical and community-based talent pipeline that smart city innovations depend on. The deployment of smart city innovation also creates a very natural pathway to engage communities and neighborhoods in STEM education. Another major policy challenge that's impacted by the design of federal science policy relates to the critical challenge of engaging rural and suburban communities in smart city innovations. For example, in the earliest phases of our AI traffic signal project, a suburban community was selected for a parallel deployment. 2 years ago, Mobility 21 launched a smart city challenge competition targeted to draw in participation from outlying suburban and rural communities, while the competition fostered capacity-building collaboration between the university and communities across 4 neighboring counties. Recently, with support from the DOE, Carnegie Mellon has launched an initiative to develop mobility solutions that address problems ranging from job and healthcare access to food insecurity in Greene County, a rural corner of Pennsylvania with a high poverty rate and an elderly population. The targeted outcome is the piloting of a rural county mobility platform that can be replicated in other counties. Federal research agencies can enhance the growth of such collaborations in rural areas by incorporating grant challenges into federal smart city research initiatives, as well as supporting targeted education and outreach programs that incentivize urban, suburban, and rural collaborations. These efforts will be enhanced by national networking efforts that foster best practice learning, tech transfer, and innovation across communities. In summary, the work of this committee and the programs it has authorized have led to a technology revolution in computing, communications, autonomy, and artificial intelligence. The application of these breakthroughs to cyber physical systems creates the potential to fundamentally improve the economic, social, and environmental fabric of our communities. By focusing on a 3-pronged effort to A, increase core investments in foundational disciplines, B, foster greater interagency collaboration to support resource development and deployment, and C, support agency strategies to incorporate workforce development and bring urban, suburban, and rural communities to collaborate. I believe this committee and the Congress can have a dramatic positive impact on scaling the deployment of smart city innovations across America. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you. Dr. Bowles, we now recognize you for 5 minutes of testimony.
Thank you, Chairwoman Stevens and members of the committee for inviting me here to testify today. As mentioned earlier, I'm an assistant professor in civil and environmental engineering at Wayne State University, and it is my pleasure to share about my current research on smarter transportation technologies and their usefulness for addressing transportation inequity. Much of my current research focuses on investigating the social impacts of transportation projects. My latest project, for which I'm a co-investigator, is funded by the National Science Foundation, and it aims to improve the ability to represent distinct travel needs of transport disadvantaged communities. And this is using mixed modes of sampling and data collection. My objective is not only to provide a clear picture of how transportation systems affect society, but to support the design of more sustainable transportation interventions that meet the needs of all segments of society. As we know, smarter transportation technologies, which range from GPS data generation to connected and autonomous vehicle technology, are transforming our transportation landscape as we know it today. These technologies hold the promise of significantly reducing traffic incidents and traffic delay and enabling new and more far-reaching transportation services in terms of ride-sharing, shared ridership, and microtransit. However, few research efforts and industry efforts have focused on potential benefits and impacts to transportation disadvantaged communities, and these are low-income, minority, and transit-dependent travelers. And without efforts to investigate how well smart transportation solutions and connected autonomous vehicle technologies can serve as solutions for addressing the broadest set of needs for society, we risk excluding those with the greatest transportation needs from the vast benefits of smarter transportation technologies, and potentially reinforcing patterns of decline and underemployment for struggling cities across the United States. The recent project, the NSF project, is titled Data-Informed Scenario Planning for Mobility Decision-Making in Resource-Constrained Communities. This is a 4-year research effort, and the project is being undertaken by a partnership of faculty, researchers, and students and stakeholders across University of Michigan, Georgia Tech, Wayne State University, and Howard University. This project is motivated by the need to understand how smart mobility solutions can be leveraged to empower community-based decision-making around solutions for these communities. The emphasis here is on low-income, resource-constrained communities in particular, because of the promise of smart mobility that can lead to significant gains in quality of service delivery, even under resource constraints. The project is designed to impart the community with the capacity to define and deploy mobility solutions that support greater accessibility to employment opportunities, education, and healthcare. There are 4 clear objectives of this project. First is to define a cost-effective data collection strategy that assesses the performance of the transit system in Benton Harbor, which is where this research is based, track mobility patterns of residents, and acquire resident perceptions of their mobility. Second is to use that data to collect and calibrate analytical models and predict resident demand for mobility services. Third is to implement a community-based decision-making framework based on scenario planning methods and smart mobility technologies, data visualization, predictive analytics used in the process of predicting these outcomes. And finally, to implement a consensus mobility solution and assess the impact. My primary role in this effort is to design and estimate components of what is called a travel demand model. And the key here is that individual data collected in order to estimate these models represent the travel behaviors of various demographics and segments in the community, and therefore the ability to accurately predict travel choices and outcomes for all population segments is tied to how well these segments are represented in the travel data set and for model estimation. So a major contribution of this effort is to define the extent to which new data collection methods and novel community engagement approaches can improve representation of these target groups in our travel demand models. And this is essentially a pressing issue with regard to under-resourced communities like Benton Harbor. So far to date, we're 1 year into our project, and our survey data collection approach, which is a distinguishing factor of our study and travel model development, employs a mixture of traditional and electronic survey modes in order to achieve a higher representation of transport disadvantaged communities. Prior work that we've done validates the soundness of this approach. And the focal point of this data collection approach is a series of 2-hour survey workshops that provides a personal point of contact for survey respondents. In these workshops, research staff trains facilitators and are made available to assist the participants in completing the activity survey, as well as registering for activity survey data collection using GPS. To date, we've accomplished a total of 4 of these data collection workshops, And this resulted in a total of 140 survey respondents. And the key and the most important takeaway here is that there are at least 40% of our respondents who would not have been able to participate in these surveys had not we offered and emphasized a mixture of data collection efforts. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Mr. Averitt, we'll recognize you for 5 minutes of testimony.
Good morning, Chairwoman Stevens and Congressman Cloud and Congressman Foster. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. Chairwoman Stevens introduced me. My name is Scott Averitt. I work for Bosch here in Farmington Hills as a technical expert and manager of public-private partnerships. Bosch is a global company with roughly 410,000 employees spread across more than 60 countries around the world. We first established a presence in the U.S. in 1906 and currently employ nearly 35,000 associates in more than 100 locations in North America. We have technologies across all 4 different business sectors that are applicable towards smart mobility and smart communities. Our vision for a smart city is to create an interconnected ecosystem that works to optimize performance, increase efficiency, and enhance quality of life for all. In order for smart community solutions to be successful, they must be born out of people's experiences and needs. Bosch draws upon a user experience-driven process to develop our products and services. One of the fundamental truths that defines a thriving community is the accessibility to safe and efficient mobility. For example, our recent grant submission to the U.S. Department of Transportation in partnership with the Michigan Department of Transportation aims to achieve this. Through the deployment of Bosch's Video as a Sensor solution, our cameras will increase pedestrian and vehicle safety through detection, prioritization, and alerts of pedestrians and cyclists. Additional technologies from our partners will help to reduce traffic incidents and congestions through the use of vehicle-to-vehicle and vehicle-to-infrastructure communications. The benefits include reduced emergency vehicle response times and public transportation on-time performance. Additionally, Bosch cameras will be used to identify wrong-way drivers. The system will use communications and digital signage to send out alerts to the driver and to nearby travelers to mitigate risk and save lives. The intelligent video analytics embedded in our cameras can also help cities with tasks such as curbside management, delivery zone violations and availability, parking analytics, and double parking detection. Bosch has partnered with the Ohio Department of Transportation regarding deployment and testing of technologies along the US 33 Smart Mobility Corridor. Video analytics are being used to generate warnings for cross traffic, curve speed, exit ramp queue, red light violation, work zones along the detection and notifications for pedestrians and wrong-way drivers. These technologies are applicable and scalable from big cities to small cities to rural communities. As part of a recent U.S. DOT grant awarded to the Ohio Department of Transportation, Bosch is the technology provider on a project that will test and deploy driver assistance systems in the form of truck platooning. The technologies to be deployed are expected to help cities, suburban areas, and rural communities through improved road safety, decreased fuel consumption, and improved freight logistics efficiency. Freight shipping is essential to the success of many industries. Therefore, it is critical that we continue to innovate and transform this industry in a sustainable way. Personal mobility solutions should be scalable and accessible to all. Because Bosch's e-bike system aims to extend cycling accessibility to a wider range of commuters. Bosch's pedal assist motor drive engages only when pedaling. This enables precise assisted speeds of up to 28 miles per hour with hands-free, no-throttle operation. E-bikes essentially flatten hills, shorten distances, and provide a viable option to ride for those who otherwise could not. The Bosch in Blue program has been successfully implemented across the country. This program provides specially outfitted e-bikes to police departments as a trial period to augment their mobility fleets. Police departments have praised advantages of increased range, higher speeds, and incredible flexibility. E-bikes are a great way for officers to engage with the community while still quickly and safely getting to where they are needed. Vehicle parking continues to be a challenge for drivers and communities alike. Bosch's smart parking solution detects parking availability for garages, lots, and on-street. The camera solution performs dual functionality by providing security video and parking spot detection. Parking management software and dashboards make it easy to share parking availability via signage and customer-specific apps to the community. More efficient parking systems help to reduce vehicle traffic from circling the block looking for a spot. It improves driver experience, leading to greater return customers and improved parking spot utilization rates. Our cameras use onboard intelligent video analytics to generate a separate data stream that provides information about object identification, classification, and path of motion. This method preserves privacy by not sending real raw video and also reducing the back-end communication bandwidth requirements. Thank you for your time today, and I enjoy looking forward to answering questions.
Excellent. Well, at this point, we're going to begin our first round of questions from the members of Congress here today, and the chair is going to recognize herself for 5 minutes. And thank you for this round of testimony. This is nuanced and technical, and we often say that the devil's in the details. Well, my takeaway is the devil's in the data and how we're recognizing, working with the data and capturing it. And we certainly have infinite opportunity to capture data this day and age, the rate at which we are collecting, and certainly appreciate the nod to the role that this committee plays in catalyzing and transforming technology opportunities, mobility solutions, the if not but for principle of where the federal government comes in as an effective partner. Learn from the FAST Act, the most recent surface transportation law that Congress authorized funding for a number of programs focused on improving mobility, but yet there's still some aching for R&D dollars. And I'd like for each one of you, if you don't mind, to just chime in on your view of the federal role in supporting research and development and the deployment of smart mobility technologies across this country, particularly including small cities and communities. And then also, let's take it down just one more notch and look at how the federal government balances long-term research needs with short-term deployment and testing activities. And Mr. Coulter, if you don't mind, I'd love to start with you.
Yeah, so thank you. So as I mentioned, in our pilot program, the traditional funding options are not sufficient to allow us to pursue it. And so, as I mentioned, either we through grants and R&D at the federal level, or stricter vehicle safety mandates, or whatever it takes to help to make the technology more cost effective, because the technology is there, but the cost is still a barrier. And so if we can use R&D for that, or those mandates, that would be very helpful.
Unlocking barriers, indeed. Mr. Dowd, I know you have some firsthand experience with federal R&D dollars. And
I have strong views in this space. The current rate in which communities and universities are being funded right now on mobility is not good. There was a $60 million ADS grant that was put out by USDOT. It was way short in terms of the amount of money. There were in Texas, there was 2 excellent applications that were submitted, no funding for Texas at all. Virginia got 2. It's unfortunate with automation as being the forefront of where we're going, that we don't have enough money in the system.
Yeah.
National Science Foundation, on the other hand, has been great in terms of they have the Smart and Connected Communities. They have a $43 million grant program, and that's out right now to help communities and universities work together to try to solve mobility solutions.
Yeah. And we here in Michigan recognize how much we are doing with so little, and we're doing it almost at the expense of not having.
I'd like to point out, though, Detroit did win ADS grants. So.
We'll take all the grants we can get. Go ahead, Dr. Rajkumar.
Sure. I'll just point out that the smart mobility market, if you will, is supposed to become a multi-trillion-dollar market in the future per year. With a T, right?
Yep.
And it turns out there is actually global competition with China in particular emerging as a very competitive rival. So I think in the U.S., going back to history and so on, we should continue to be investing substantial dollars add to the budgets that we currently have to enable our leadership, which also not just have a technological implication, but an economic implication down the road.
Yeah.
One thing I'll say is that transportation is one of those types of services that really requires the federal government to lead. A lot of large-scale implementations just won't happen without the leadership and funding and support from the federal government. And so I think that one important thing is to really set priorities for incorporating more smart mobility and making sure that we're doing that in such a way that the most disadvantaged communities are not left behind. So the extent to which that the federal government can serve as a catalyst for bringing together efforts from research, from industry, and from the public sector, and mandating that there is clear consideration for the broadest set of transportation needs. I think that that's something that's very important for the federal government to lead in.
The deployment, yeah. And our private sector partner, please tell us.
It's actually very critical in that respect from a funding perspective. It provides an opportunity that otherwise wouldn't exist with industry. For example, we recently partnered for an ATC MTD grant, which is the short name of what you pronounced earlier, for going along the Woodward Corridor to put in pedestrian detection and those types of systems. And those technologies exist, right? But getting them deployed out into the community and seeing how well they really work and how do they really impact the community around them, it allowed us for that. We partnered with Wayne State to be able to, after the point, go and take a look and see how well did it really work, to reach out to the community and see, was it effective, how was it perceived, right? So beyond just deploying it, that's one thing. You actually got to make sure that it's doing what it's supposed to do, and that's where the grants really come into play in that respect.
Well, and with the remainder of my time, the elephant in the room also appears to be productivity. As productivity is either going to decline or increase and inequality might rise, these technologies not only have the ability to save lives and grow our regional economy, they have the ability to create jobs. And I was just wondering if you can touch base a little bit on the economic development opportunity of smart mobility strategies. Dr. Rajkumar, go ahead.
The average American commutes for about 51 minutes per day to and from work, right? And most vehicles have a single passenger in them who's driving. If the vehicle can drive itself, a significant portion of those 51 minutes can be turned into productive work if you want. So it's a lot of quantitative impact on productivity if you want. With respect to jobs, I think there's a lot of fear about driving jobs going away. Luckily, full automation is many years away, but it will happen at some point in time. If we worry about loss of jobs and not invest in the technology, countries like China will take over the leadership, and those jobs will go away anyway, and we would have lost the technology leadership as well. Right? What we need to do is basically invest in the technology, sustain and extend that leadership, and meanwhile actually put in programs in place to basically maybe retrain workers, to basically maybe garner even higher paying jobs, basically fixing these higher tech systems, maintaining those systems.
Did you want to
Sure. Again, getting back to the ability for the federal government to provide that seed money to create jobs is a critical part of particularly in transportation. We have such an impressive transportation sector, but we aren't always on the forefront of developing what those new technologies are. If we had more grant money along that way, I think that we could create jobs around those spaces.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly something we here in Michigan know very, very well, and one of the joys of my job is boasting about my region and the rate at which we are proliferating technologies and innovations at scale and the jobs that depend on it, but they need to be deployed, and it can't just be, to Dr. Bill's point, for one community over another. It needs to be equitable. So with that, I'm going to yield back the remainder of my time and recognize my colleague from Texas, Mr. Cloud, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Well, thank you, Chairwoman Stevens. Again, it's really great to be here. I am from the Gulf Coast of Texas. My district includes Corpus Christi. I live in a town of Victoria that's a little smaller than this, and then the rest of it's agriculture, and so it's a pretty interesting and diverse district. I have to say, driving in here, it was nice to see colored leaves on the trees. So I appreciate you holding this in the fall. It's a nice treat. We don't get that very often in South Texas, so we get about 2 weeks of winter.
Yeah, with the gentleman, you don't have trees at all?
We do have trees. They go from green to no leaves in 2 weeks and then start over. But yeah, it's really good to be here. I appreciate it. Dr. Rajkumar, I want to start with you. I understand that a team from Metro 21 worked with the Department of Energy to examine how communities in southwestern Pennsylvania can utilize and utilize these modern innovations in transportation to improve rural mobility. That's extremely important where I come from. Could you talk a little bit about your work and how the lessons learned from that research could be used in developing modern rural mobility plans across the country?
We are very early in that particular process. Several factoids. Greene County that we are working with is probably the poorest county in Pennsylvania, borders a tri-state region. Luckily, they actually have a home university called Waynesburg University, which is actually located there as being a huge educational force, if you will, for the local population. So I guess, unfortunately, it's very rural, economically not doing well, but we actually have this brain, if you will, right at the center. So we are working very closely with the president of Waynesburg University, basically put to brainstorm and discuss education programs, number one. Number two, try to define innovation projects, if you will, that we can start engaging the community in. So we're looking at multiple aspects, if you will, looking at how we can bring to bear public transit aspects, subsidized ride sharing, micro transit, looking at AV shuttles, if you will, looking at whether we can bring in electrification of vehicles into the picture and so on. So all of it is ongoing. So forming relationships between faculty in both universities, engage the communities in both locations, and see what technologies can be applied. We think incentives will make a big difference and policies will make a difference.
Okay. Do you have anyone else have examples of projects that are being implemented or in rural communities specifically, or some successes maybe that we're making where we are in advancing projects? And
it is a challenge in the following sense. I like to draw the analogy with going back to the 1930s when electrification of rural communities was happening. The private electric companies were not interested in basically deploying electrification because the population is sparse and the investments are heavy. Right? So basically we need to revisit some of the experiences from the past and try to repeat it for technology and mobility as well.
Okay. Our district too is an export district, so we have energy assets, and then we have farming communities. Everyone's trying to get their products to, so freight becomes a big deal. Could you speak to any developments that are happening along the lines of freight transportation? What can be done from the perspective of these, what can we do to help promote development of these technologies as it regards to trade and
So automation of freight vehicles, of course, will be such a big application that can drive this forward. Driving on highways actually turns out to be a very monotonous job, if you will. And then the truck drivers basically have to travel very far from the homes for long distances, and they are limited to driving 11 hours a day. If it turns out the vehicle can drive itself, it can drive 23 hours a day, right, and be safer as well. And that in turn can actually be coupled with humans actually driving in urban context and dense context and so on. So I think that technology frontier, I think, needs further investments.
So I would just like to echo the fact that automation, often we talk about moving people, but because of the way that it's not developing as quick as everybody thought it would be, but in terms of moving goods, it is actually much more capable because there's less opportunity for people to get hurt. So that's a space where additional investment would be very helpful.
There's also the possibility with automation to shift driving of freight to off hours so that you're not, in the middle of traffic jams and things of that nature, so you can actually better manage your infrastructure and you're not jamming it up with a bunch of freight in the middle of the day.
That's a good point. Any other thoughts?
The other thing, so we have this project that we've got with the Ohio Department of Transportation, which I mentioned in my testimony, that's looking at truck platooning, and it's mostly looking at like driver assistance features, right? Again, how do you make it easier for those 11 hours a day so that the truck driver's not, having issues with that, or they've got a little bit of an easier job. That's one thing. The other things like mentioned about doing 24 hours and stuff of that nature, where you can actually still have a driver in the truck, but they're following behind other ones so that when they get off the freeway, they can manage from that location. So there's lots of different things you can do in automation with trucking to really get you to those points.
Technology could also help in pulling together demand from multiple smaller producers, if you will, where if they're able to get together into a virtual market, if you will, they can pool their demand, and basically one freight vehicle can actually meet all those demands. So it's basically about pooling of your shipping requirements.
Right.
I also would like to point out that in rural communities, there is a spatial mismatch oftentimes between where people live and where things are, right? And so drone delivery is currently not, you can't realize it the way it should be realized right now because of the FAA regulations, but the ability to get medication to people in rural places, be able to get them even doctor's care through remote doctor, basically bringing the camera to the people and having them have, so there's many opportunities that to be able to explore some of those opportunities that hasn't been fully realized yet.
Yeah, I think we have a lot more, but my time's
Excellent,
up. So.
excellent. The chair will now recognize Mr. Foster for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Chairwoman, and I want to thank you for having this hearing. I'm Congressman Bill Foster. I represent the 11th District of Illinois in the suburbs of Chicago. I sometimes introduce myself as saying I represent 100% of the strategic reserve of physicists in the United States Congress. I'm the only PhD physicist in the place. But I'm also a manufacturer. When I was 19 years old, my little brother and I started a company in our basement that now manufactures about 70% of the theater lighting equipment in the United States. And so we do hardware, software, sheet metal, painting, and we've kept all those manufacturing jobs in the Midwest, which is something I'm really proud of. And so I'd like to, congratulate Chairwoman Stevens again for having this hearing really in the heart of auto component manufacturing, because when the revolutions that we're seeing and we're going to be seeing in automotive are going to have a big impact on the parts that go into cars. And so it's really appropriate and good that the technology is talked about and developed so close to the manufacturing centers here. Now, my question really has to do with the timescales. There's sort of three simultaneous revolutions we're talking about. There's electric cars and trucks, there is self-driving cars and trucks, and then there's smart roadways and infrastructure. And so if the panel could just sort of comment on when they see, say, the 50% adoption point for each of those, for both cars and trucks and just those three technologies. Electric, self-driving, and then smart roadways.
Sure. I guess if you look at the numbers, Congressman Foster, we have 250 million registered cars in the U.S. today, and we sell about, in a very good year, about 18 million cars, right? Very good year, right? If you basically then the average age of a vehicle registered is about 11 years. If you do the math, if all the vehicles that are being sold every year become automated, connected, and electric, it still take about 15 years, right? Of course, it's going to be a long time before all the vehicles being sold in a given year has those capabilities. So we're really talking about at least a few decades for us to reach a 50% threshold, if you will. So that being said, there's
50% of new cars being manufactured, which will happen much before the 50% of the cars on the road. And so I was more interested in where we hit the 50% of cars being manufactured. Would we say electric, self-driving, or so on?
So studies indicate that if even about 8% of the vehicles on the road basically have the safety features, connectivity features, that's actually a very big positive impact, if you will. So basically, really, if you do the numbers, it turns out that in the next 10 years or so, we will actually reach that 8%, 50% threshold to the next decade.
Right. Other comments or estimates on that, Mr. Averitt?
In terms of time, I couldn't say. I can tell you one of the things, in order to get there is we need to get to cost neutrality with the existing vehicles, right? It's one thing to, have the technologies available and on the market. It's another thing for it to be affordable. And those are things that we're striving for with the OEMs, to be able to get those prices down where it's again, cost competitive with existing technologies on the road. So that's something that you just a few years out at least before you get to that point. There's a lot of work going in R&D to get to those points, especially in battery research and electrification. There's a lot of other research going on in the areas of automated vehicles, but it's still early yet for those things. There's a lot of extra hardware and sensors and so forth that need to be added to a vehicle to make that happen. So it's a few years off before we get to neutrality.
I would also like to, on automation, I think maybe you're thinking about things linearly, right? When is that 50% going to hit? When automation may actually come to us in a different way. The idea that we'll have car lots with automated cars, I think, is less likely than us having, changing our mobility choices to include automated transportation. So it's not that you're going to go buy an automated car, but you can actually use an automated car. So I don't think the 50% piece may not really actually be applicable in that space. I think we'll actually be changing a little bit of how we consume cars.
Well, I was just struck by, I believe that Tesla is claiming they're going to deliver full autonomy next year. Okay, which, and so this is, there's a pretty wide spread in opinions on, when this might actually happen. And so I just, it must matter tremendously to industry trying to plan for that transition.
So what's fascinating, though, is that the other automated car companies aren't even close to that. So is it Tesla is so far advanced and so far beyond Waymo and Cruise and like that? Is that the case, or is it that they define automation differently? So I would, that to me, I don't. It's if Google Waymo is out there still testing their cars in Arizona because it's flat and it's dry, they haven't quite gotten to Michigan yet, or how is that possible that Tesla is able to magically come up with an automated car?
Yep, well, I guess time will, yes.
So I unfortunately don't have an exact answer to the 50% market penetration question, but one thing I think it's tied to is the network of places where people might refuel, and so we have this rich network of fuel stations for gasoline. We don't see many fueling stations for electrical vehicles, and so the extent to which that becomes more of a publicly aware or incentivized thing on the business side, I think that we'll see a lot more people seeing the benefits of electrical vehicles and seeing it as a real option for them and purchasing. So that's what I would add.
Yeah, I have to say that from my time living in Ypsilanti, I had this nightmare of what happens at a University of Michigan football game when 100,000 people drive in, discharge their batteries, then the game's over, and they all want to find a charging station.
Yeah, to that point, I mean, just some quick math, 1%, if you take 1 million electric vehicles and you put them on the grid to charge, it's about 2% of our grid's capacity. Now you do that at 10 million vehicles, now you're at 20%. You get to the 450 million, and they're not all charging at the same time, but you've quickly exceeded the grid's capacity very easily. So there's a lot that has to be done on both sides of it. It can't just be the vehicle side of it. You actually have to do a lot on the grid side as well.
Yeah. Would you anticipate there'll be a world when you have self-driving internal combustion cars and trucks as a significant component, just because of the difficulties in getting the electric infrastructure?
I think there's going to be a mix. I think one of the things we've seen is that a lot of things, as they're rolling out new technologies, they tend to roll out the newest stuff on the latest vehicles, right? So a lot of the fully automated stuff will wind up on the higher-end electric vehicles at the very beginning as they deploy technologies. As as it matures and as the costs come down, you'll start to see it more on mainstream vehicles. But there's the point that Bill brought up about there's the possibility that there's a massive shift in the way we have vehicle ownership, right? In terms of, where we have that 450 million, or if you have a lot of automated vehicles, is it a matter of, you click a button on your smartphone and it just comes pick you up and you go where you need to be, and you don't actually own a car anymore, and that might change the ownership model dramatically, as well as the need for how many would charge and so forth. So there's a lot of things that are being looked at by industry as well.
Electric vehicles do have fewer parts, fewer moving parts, and the cost of battery is actually dropping significantly. At some point, it will not make economic sense to basically buy an internal combustion engine car. So the transformation could be abrupt, if you will.
Yeah, no, I've seen estimates as low as 2 to 3 years, where the crossover, where the total cost of ownership will be lower for an electric car, just because batteries are just dropping like a rock.
That's very much the case, yes.
Yield back.
We're going to do one more round of questions, so the chair's going to recognize herself for another round of questions. And actually, just picking back up on that, we just talked about the need to invest in the R&D and how we define deployment and the role that the government plays in helping us hit some of these goals. The question is this all incumbent on industry to hit the electric vehicle considerations? We're working on the electric vehicle tax credit to up it from 200,000 vehicles per year to 600,000, recognizing that also helps us hit sustainability goals as well as where industry's moving. And Mr. Coulter, I'd like to ask you, because you tend to have some really great examples of public-private partnerships and models that are working at the county level in one of Michigan's largest counties. So I'd love for you to kind of chime in ways in which government, be it at the county level, maybe reaching for federal or state government in partnership with industry.
It's true. We're very active in that space. The one piece that strikes me, because I believe it was Raj who mentioned the talent pipeline, and that's something that we're really concerned about in Oakland County, making sure that we have, the workforce that's going to be able to deploy this technology and do this. And we've been partnering with Lawrence Technological University and Oakland University, but I think that's a bigger issue than a local government can manage, and so making sure that we have the talent to be able to bring this to market is going to be really critical for us.
It's becoming, I'm looking at Dr. Bills because it's like becoming a chicken-egg question around equity and, accessing jobs and then being able to do the job, and if it's transportation, accessibility, and throughout that spectrum.
Absolutely. You see, mobility is a huge it's a huge issue for a lot of people. So there are many residents in the area who really struggle to access the opportunities that are available. And we have public transportation, but they are still not quite providing the level of coverage and the level of reliability that is required to maintain employment and maintain visits to healthcare facilities, which obviously has implications in terms of healthcare outcomes and the ability to contribute to the economy. And so as you mentioned, there's a real chicken and egg sort of dynamic going on here, where we're trying to provide people with the services so that they can reach opportunities, and we're trying to do that in a way that leverages the technologies that are coming online. And so, that's one of the...
Well, and it's going to be intentional development of the strategies, and that's, I think, again, in part to a nod to our audience and the extensive outreach that we did for today's hearing, right? This is about establishing legislation, enhancing legislation for the best outcomes for our country and obviously for our community, and you've got to have all stakeholders at the table while you're doing it. You can't just add them in down the road. This is, again, Mr. Dowd, things that you worked on when you were serving in the Obama administration and bringing partnerships together. It didn't all just come at the end when the money was awarded as on the Smart Cities projects. It's got to be a part of applications. It's got to be a part of the approaches. And with my remaining time, Mr. Averitt, you mentioned in your testimony, you talked about this, how Bosch is deploying video as sensor, a solution to increase pedestrian and vehicle safety. Could you just elaborate on Bosch's privacy and defined cybersecurity plan for deployment of this technology. Also kind of hanging above this conversation on smart mobility, the big question that everyone likes to ask is, what are the cybersecurity implications of this, and can we hack cars and hack into consumer activity?
Yeah, certainly, and that's one of the very interesting points about those technologies is that, again, with these things, we get connected vehicles as well, right? It's great if it's connected, you can do this stuff, but if somebody else can track it in a nefarious way, that's not a good thing, right? So there's a lot of things you got to do from a cybersecurity and a privacy perspective. So when it comes to the video as a sensor, one of the things that we do is we decouple the video feed from what we would consider the data stream or the object identification. So there's a separate data stream that comes out that's what's used in the intelligent transportation system. So it says there's an object here, there's a car, there's a pedestrian, there's a cyclist. There's no identification of the person, there's no facial recognition, there's no image of the face whatsoever. It's just there's a person and that they're there, or how many of them there, or they're in the cross section. There's this many vehicles at an intersection. So it's very much decoupled from, what you would think a video camera is doing, right? And then everything else from that side in terms of the actual video stream, those are accessible for, police and fire to be able to do post-accident investigation or, something of that nature. But those are all, kept behind firewalls. They're all part of the networks that are put in place, and there's very high levels of cybersecurity and other information that tries to keep that protective. Obviously, that's an ever-changing thing, so you always have to make it updatable and fixable so that you continue to morph with the threats that are out there. So that's something we do continuously.
Dr. Rajkumar.
2 points. The car makers are very sensitive to this need for cybersecurity. So they're actually spending extra time and effort on basically making sure that these vehicles are secure. They did not have to do that before. They did not worry about before, but now they are. Secondly, this is really a pre-competitive issue, if you will. So they're also open to basically working with each other to make sure that we understand the best technologies out there so that all these technologies are secure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's also about defining it for the public. And it's part of the committee's responsibility as we talk about definitions. How do we define autonomous vehicles? How do we define cybersecurity standards? We have oversight of the National Science Foundation as well as the National Institute of Standards and Technologies. And these standards become imperative for us as we move forward. And, and again, the plight for data, but data at what cost and for what outcome. Certainly one of the means to the ends, but the empirical experience also moves us forward. I'm out of time, so I'm going to yield back and now recognized by my colleague from Texas again for another round of questions.
Thank you. This is a great conversation. I have enough questions. We could probably go on for a few more hours, but try to put this in the context of what we're going to have to deal with. We're in a competitive environment. You mentioned the global competitive environment. Could you all speak to the context of where we are in relation to other countries in developing these? I know there's some very specific challenges in the sense of we care about data security and privacy, especially privacy, in a way that some of our competing countries, they can mass collect and force collect data on the individual and so from when it comes to developing these technologies, machine learning, AI, and how that all integrates into this picture. Looking through, I guess, from a technological engineering, heard that before.
Just the Senate. Just the Senate.
Just the Senate. Track is legislatively. What's the next legislative phase of development that needs to happen? Maybe regulations that are in the way that need to be looked at. The next steps of laws. Just what's the track forward for that in your mind?
If I may. As you pointed out, Congressman Cloud, it's a huge market, multi-trillion dollars per year in the smart mobility space. The technology for automated vehicles and connectivity, if you will, was literally born in the U.S. And so we started out as leaders, if you will. We need to actually, it's not going to be an easy task maintaining that leadership or extending that leadership. It requires substantial investments, I believe, for going back to the ADS grant that we discussed earlier, a lot more money needs to be invested in because a huge market, we need to continue to maintain that leadership. It has become a global race. It's not just the U.S. In the race, it's actually Europe, Germany in particular, and then in Asia, it's actually China, Japan, and Korea, if you will. So it's actually a global competition. We need to be investing resources now to keep things moving forward in our country. The regulatory aspects, I think, is a very sensitive topic, if you will. Regulations may be needed, but if we over-regulate, and other countries where the regulation is less, they may end up taking leadership because they're able to test things on the road very quickly and then get the technology to mature. That being said, I think our local companies, if you will, need to basically have responsibility, if you will. So while it needs to be regulated, I do believe that it needs to be regulated lightly to ensure that the companies are acting responsibly. I guess in the U.S., I think we're doing pretty well in terms of the technologies inside the vehicle. With respect to what's happening in infrastructure, I'm actually afraid that we may be lagging a bit. There's a lot of, I guess, controversy, if you will, in terms of infrastructure investments and the frequency, spectrum allocation and such, if you will. And I'm afraid that at this point in time, China has basically picked a horse to bet on and they're actually going forward very strongly. So we need to be very sensitive to that particular dimension of connectivity. So I'm just worried on that front.
As a global supplier for these technologies, we are implementing them across the world, right, in all the countries around the world. I wouldn't say that any one of them has more deployments than another at this point. I think one point that I could mention is that being a global company, we can put our centers of competency anywhere, right? But we have a very large presence here in Metro Detroit area. We also have a very large presence now in near Carnegie Mellon for our Bosch artificial intelligence. And that's primarily because that's where the talent's coming from, right? It's coming out of the universities. And that's a big factor between developing and deploying these technologies is we need engineers. We need software engineers. The last numbers I heard is there's something like a couple 100,000 open software positions in this country. And we just simply can't find enough to fill those voids. It's a major hurdle towards, getting to the next level in these technologies.
I would like to just build on the university system is by far one of our best assets in this race. And the ability for universities to work with companies and universities to work with communities is where I would push. So there is the partnership between universities and like Metro 21. The university and the city allows both the city to increase its capacity and allows the university to have a living lab to be able to test out different technologies. And being able to see that type of with the National Science Foundation, DOT, DOE, DHS, all have those types of programs, and being able to get them to try to work better together would be one suggestion I would have, is that they all work independently. I personally am trying to get them to work together, all three, DOE, DHS, and DOT, but it's hard. And it's hard because they just don't do that well. So from a congressional perspective, that would be one suggestion. Like FAA should be working very closely with DHS on drones. You can give multiple examples of how this can be done better. The second thing is I think that from a regulatory perspective on automated vehicles, we're in a weird space. It's a weird space. You look at Texas versus California in terms of how those two states regulate automated vehicles. You look at the way that the Department of Transportation is putting out their guidance. And it gets to be a confusing space, and I think if there was some clarity in that space, that would be very helpful. Last, on the ADS piece, I'm just going to hit that again. $60 million was a drop in the bucket to what DOT should be doing in terms of trying to drive that. Because, again, that's universities and communities working together to try to get that grant money.
I want to bring up the topic of microtransit. This is a type of smart mobility technology that is a mixture between traditional bus transit and your Ubers and your Lyfts. It's more of an on-demand service, and it helps for providing greater accessibility to areas that don't have very dense transit networks. This is a type of mobility service that we see more prevalent in abroad than we do in the United States. We have had efforts here by industry, so we've had Ford Chariot, we've had Bridge. A lot of these have gone away, but they still exist in other countries, in the UK, in China. And I think that one of the major issues with it being successful here in the United States is that we haven't gotten the right cost structure together. A lot of the efforts that we do see that are collaborations between the public sector and pilots and things like that, they have largely just been funded, and the costs are paid for, and this is piloted out to the community, but we haven't looked at how we come up with a cost structure to make this more sustainable. How do we come up with the right mix of city and county and government incentives and fare box contributions to make this type of transit work? We know that it will provide for greater accessibility in areas that don't have heavy public transportation investment. And so this is one of the things that I would highlight, is that we need to focus on how we can make these more sustainable from a cost perspective.
All right,
My
Dr.
time's
Foster.
up, so.
Yep, Dr. Foster.
Thank you. Actually, Dr. Bowles, I'd like to pick up on that point. There are a variety of ways in which we try to provide assistance to under-resourced communities. Housing assistance, food assistance, and transportation assistance seems like a real possibility here. The dream that there will be transportation as a service, where you just have essentially automated Ubers. And when you think about the $27 that it cost Mr. Dowd to come here, probably more than half of that was labor that will disappear. The capital costs of an automated Uber will be amortized over much more quickly, because it's used a much higher fraction of the time than a normal car. The expensive computers will be used most hours of the day. And so I was wondering, in terms of the research that you're doing, there's a lot of information that might be gleaned when you see Lyft and Uber competing with each other, raising and lowering costs. And you can see that the market responds pretty quickly to the uptake when they change their prices. So you might be able to get a lot of information on how under-resourced communities start using ride-sharing services as a function of price, and then understand if a significant subsidy to those prices, so that if you had access to automated Ubers, say with a 50% or a 75% discount, if you were a member of an under-resourced community, that could be a very effective way of delivering assistance in the community that would offer real economic help, as well as access to jobs, which is the key long-term thing. Have people used the big data sets that Uber and Lyft must have internally to look at how different communities use the services as a function of the price they charge?
So there's a lot of promise there with regard to leveraging big data to understand travel behavior and therefore target communities in order to provide services that fit their needs. The challenge is, and this is based on the research that we're doing in Benton Harbor. Benton Harbor is a small city on the western coast of Michigan, and there are a lot of people who really struggle to access job opportunities in the area. They're transit dependent. There are large percentages of the community that don't have automobiles accessible in the household, and so they are really dependent on transit, and the extent to which that we can improve transit to provide more coverage by leveraging smart mobility technologies will provide real returns to these communities. One of the barriers, however, and this is something that I think that we know but we tend to forget, is that there are many people who, for which the digital divide is still present. They might have a smartphone, but it's not up to date. They are not in the position or positioned well to download an application and use it to call a Lyft or an Uber to take them. And so we've done a lot of outreach and interfacing with these community members, and it takes a lot of orchestration to get them to participate in generating this type of data. So there is a question of how well we're representing these communities because they are not contributing to the big data at the same rates that others might be. And so that's one thing to remember is that, we do need to think about how well we can capture their needs given the existing ways that we're collecting data. It is true that we are in position to provide real benefits to the community members, but we have to figure out smarter ways to make sure that we're capturing their needs.
Yeah, because I think, one of a lot of people, everyone is worried that technology is going to drive even more inequality and wealth. That's, the potential loss of jobs.
That they will be left behind.
Right, and so that, but on the other hand, there's this incredible observation that if you're a billionaire, you cannot get a better smartphone, which is probably the most important device in our lives. And so that, just that simple fact means that there's a lot of equality that's being driven by technology, and transportation as a service delivered at very low cost to everyone would be a tremendous equalizer.
Absolutely.
in our economic life. So I think, this is a real source of encouragement for me. And
Kind of just try to give you a little bit more encouragement. So the community of practice that we talked about with the Texas Innovation Alliance and Smart Cities Lab, our 20 cities, we found something fascinating, which is that access to non-emergent medical care, right, trying to get people to the doctor, was a significant problem because of cost, that they couldn't get there. Either that, they had to take 2 buses, et cetera. And what we found in almost every one of the communities that we work with, the public health folks were stepping in. They were stepping in and getting their own programs with Lyft and subsidizing the Lyft, and not necessarily Uber. They found Uber difficult to work with.
I wonder why. Okay.
But with Lyft and a lot of the communities with the public health folks, that's exactly what was happening. They have these little nascent incubating opportunity to get people to non-emergent medical care using Lyft on a subsidized basis.
Right, and you can imagine, even from the point of view of getting people to jobs, if you had effectively access to free or very low-cost transportation on demand, it could be transformative to the economic opportunity of people. And so, this last question, what is the guess for how much cheaper the Uber ride will get when you go to full autonomy? Is that going to be a factor or two? All right.
I guess the basic math is that roughly 75 cents of every dollar that you pay Uber and Lyft goes back to the human driver, right? And then I guess in principle, the vehicle can drive itself, that 75 cents stays with the company, right? So if I guess...
Well, then they'll compete and they'll lower draw and it will stay with the consumer.
So the lower bound would be basically 25%, right?
So there could be a factor of 4 reduction.
Up to a factor of 4, but you have to worry about the investment is basically much higher, needs to be maintained, needs to be delivered, needs to be picked up and so on. So I think a factor of 2 is something that we could look at, but some people likely debate that whether it will be that high or not.
Yeah. So, but that's really promising because that means a relatively small subsidy can get someone to a job where then the job that they pay, they'll end up paying more taxes than the subsidy, the value.
And we could even start with a very focused initial program where if somebody cannot have access to transportation to get to a job interview, they're not going to get the job, right? So even if we can just subsidize that first interview step, and then after that they start making money if you want. So it could be very targeted. We actually have a program at Carnegie Mellon where we basically had a foundation fund a pot of money with which we generate coupons that we actually hand out to people in the rural or suburban communities, if you will, that they can use to pay Uber.
Yeah, and you don't have to wait for the technology
Correct.
to do that experiment because a human Uber is just as effective.
Correct.
Fascinating. Well, now I have to personally jump on an airplane, but I just want to thank the
Not an Uber.
Chairwoman again for having this hearing. It really highlights everything we're talking about is downstream of decades of federal investment. and, the DARPA challenge that proved you could make self-driving cars. I represent Argonne National Laboratories, where all of the lithium-ion batteries in cars use cathode components developed, more than a decade ago at Argonne National Lab. And it just goes on and on and on. And I just think one of the great things about this hearing, it should highlight the crucial role in federal investment in the technology that shows up in, the thousands and tens of thousands of jobs made right here. So. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Foster. Well, before we bring the hearing to a close, I certainly want to thank our witnesses and our audience for participating and coming to today's hearing. It's certainly going to be a marker for us going forward, and it was significant to have this in Livonia, Michigan, and in southeastern Michigan. And we thank all of you for joining. The record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional statements from members or for additional questions that the committee may ask of the witnesses. And at this time, our witnesses are excused, and the hearing is now adjourned.
Thank you. It was a pleasure being on the panel with you. I think you will recognize some of your colleagues. Oh, wonderful, wonderful. I just joined. Thank you so much.